This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, I'm going to talk about the single most important thing that you can do while you're alive here on planet Earth. And that single most important thing is something that God has assigned to each one of us who are His children in Christ. And the assignment is rather simple, but it's not always obeyed. It's not always completed. Jesus Christ, above really anything else, commanded us to win souls to Jesus Christ, to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ throughout the world. And what that means is that He has given us the option to use our intelligence, our creativity, our gifting, our talents or lack of talents or whatever. But one of the primary things, it's not the only thing, but one of the primary things that you and I should be about, if we're truly to obey God, when God said, when Jesus Christ talked about what He wanted you and I to do before His return to planet Earth, which, by the way, is coming up. The return of Jesus Christ to planet Earth is not only coming up, it's on time, and the train, so to speak, is on the way. It's not a second late, and it's not a second early. In fact, in the sense of a metaphor, if you were to be standing on a subway track or a train track, and if you were to dare peek over and look at the train track a long way away, miles away, and if you looked very carefully, or you might hear the rumbling of tracks or a train whistle, you could see this train slowly coming down the track for you and me or anybody else that wants to get on. So God's train of salvation, and there's a great rendition of that, by the way, that will blow you away by the very gifted guitarist Eric Clapton that sings about this. So God's not late. He's on time. He's coming. But He asked you and I to do something, and that is He wants us to bring as many people as we possibly can onto that train of salvation with us, so that we and the people we have invited might enter eternity into heaven with Jesus Christ and spend forever and ever eternity in a brand new world, in a brand new city called the New Jerusalem, and a brand new earth called the New Earth. It's the intention of this loving King. Okay, He's a loving King. And it's the intention of this loving King to bring as many people as He possibly can into the kingdom of heaven with Him, to celebrate, to enjoy life together forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You see, people have this weird idea about who God is. I mean, really, Christians have a weird idea about who God is. Not all. Not all. Many Christians have an accurate idea who God is because they've bothered to read the Word of God. But look, let me just put it to you as simply as I possibly can. One of the first things we learn in the Bible is that God is love, and He's good. Now, right there, that puts Him way apart from all the other gods, gurus, spiritual teachers, and prophets, because they're not love. God is love. And He proved it by dying on a cross so you could have eternal life. So Jesus, because He's love, He tells each one of us who are His disciples. Now, disciples doesn't mean just the 12 people who followed around Jesus Christ when He was alive. Those are the original disciples. But the disciples of Jesus Christ are all those people who have made the decision in their lives to pick up their cross and follow Jesus. Picking up the cross represents being willing to deny oneself of one's own ambitions and desires and personal goals. And pick up the cross means to prioritize God's business, not just our business. And if we do that, we find total fulfillment, total joy. So our job, according to Jesus, is to go into all the world and preach the gospel until I come, or until he comes. Now, when Jesus Christ says, go into all the world and preach the gospel until I come, he's not talking about shouting, yelling, holding up placards, or whatever. He's talking about effectively communicating his gospel message. So you see, when his gospel message is effectively communicated to people in the world around us, that is going to increase statistically the number of people who are going to respond positively or favorably to the message of Jesus Christ, which will result in their actually being saved. It will result in millions of people becoming born again, because we have bothered to communicate the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ to them in a compelling, articulate, intelligent, spirit-led way, which they can wrap their heads around. And then it creates in them, if we're communicating effectively, it creates in them a passionate desire to accept Christ into their lives and be born again, which means they will enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, I want to make a distinction between just preaching the gospel and making a lot of religious noise and preaching the gospel and being effective. Those are two different dynamics. Saying you're preaching the gospel by making a lot of noise, by shouting at people, by holding up placards, or whatever you do, but it's not winning anybody into the kingdom of God, is not effective evangelism. It's really just, it's like missing the mark. It's metanoia. It's sin. It's missing the target. You're not effective. You're not going to hear the words spoken by Jesus Christ to you, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Because a good and faithful servant actually hits the target. He wins the hearts and minds of his fellow man or woman, and he brings them into the kingdom of God. That's what it's all about. And that's why you and I are here on planet Earth. We're here to do many, many things. God has given each one of us a spectrum, a wide spectrum of abilities, talents, opportunities, all kinds of things. And God expects us to minister to people, not necessarily getting up on a stage and Bible teaching, but minister to people. Let the light of Jesus Christ in us shine in every area of life, so that when people interact with us, when people get to know us, they sense there's something different about us. Our very life communicates to them about the reality of Jesus Christ on a higher level. That's being effective in your communication of Jesus Christ. People want in on what you have. So this is called, theologically, the Great Commission. It's the great commandment that God gives his people in the last days. And it comes down to things like go into all the world and preach the gospel of salvation, of course. Make disciples of all nations, which means teach people all over the world how to apply all the truths of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation to every area of life. And then Jesus says that we are to occupy the land he has placed us in until he comes. Or another way of translating that is that we are to do kingdom business until he comes. Now, what is kingdom business? What is true spiritual occupation? Kingdom business means we prioritize God's kingdom business over our own personal business. But we know that by doing so, we put our faith in God and we trust God that He will take care of our business. He will multiply and prosper our business supernaturally so that we will get the things that that we were desiring to get through hard work, through planning, through sacrificing time invested in our own personal businesses, God will bless us with all that and more if we simply get our priorities right, which can only be done by faith, and we put His kingdom business first. What is His kingdom business? God's kingdom business is winning souls for Jesus Christ, occupying the land until I come, making disciples of all nations, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, ministering to people that are down and out, helping people, standing up for righteousness and truth in our nation, be willing to be counted as a Christian, stand up as a Spirit-filled Christian, using the wisdom of God, the intelligence of God, and get involved in the spiritual battle for our nation, which is raging right now. Not as some extreme lunatic, not as some zealot, but as somebody who is perceived by people around them as being wise, somebody who's perceived as being effective versus being a Christian lunatic and a wacko. Sorry for saying those words, but I would be remiss and I would be lying if I didn't say the terms, be careful not to be perceived as a lunatic and a wacko, because the reality is there are so many Christians in our nation and in our world right now who, because they do not have the wisdom of God, because they have never taken the time or paid the price to gain real wisdom, real education about what they are doing, they have no awareness that in their minds they think that what they're doing is witnessing. In their minds they think they're influencing people for Jesus Christ. In their minds they think they're being faithful, but because of their lack of education in spiritual things and lack of wisdom, they're doing the exact opposite. They're driving people away from Jesus Christ, and they are making the gospel of Jesus Christ unnecessarily offensive. That person is not going to hear the words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," because they're not being effective. The price for being effective is the same thing as the price for being effective in any other realm of life. If you're a professional golfer, the way you get good at golfing is you practice, you practice, you practice, you practice, you train with the best coaches, you're always perfecting your game. There's a price to be paid. You're educating yourself about how to be more effective as a golfer. There's a price to be paid. You're willing to pay the price. The reward is you become a championship golfer. The same thing with basketball, the same thing with football, the same thing with soccer or so many other careers. Excellence comes from discipline and education and practice. So, if we want to effectively reach people for Jesus Christ in our nation, we can't expect to show up. Let's use the golfing analogy. You don't show up on the golf course wearing, very expensive golf shoes, golf hat, golf shirt, the whole thing, But you never paid the price to learn how to golf. You're an embarrassment. People laugh at you. No, you've got to pay the price to be effective. It's the same thing in any area of life. In any area of life, in order to be effective, in order to be superior, and I mean it in the good sense of the word, not like a pride-based superiority, a superiority that comes from the fact that whatever you're about and whatever you're doing, you're a sculptor, an artist, a filmmaker, a salesman, entrepreneur, a businessman, a mother, whatever it is, when you've paid the price to learn the knowledge, the education, the discipline that is necessary for you to be excellent, then the people around you will respect you. Your communication is effective because they know by watching your example, not just your blah, 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 they know by your example that you are effective at what you do. And therefore, they're going to listen to you because you've proved to them through your self-education, your discipline and practice, that you've perfected your game. You've studied what you're doing. And that earns you a right to the table, the head of the table, where people will listen. Tragically, we have a lot of Christians in this world because they suffer from this theological plague that the evangelical church so often embraced, thinking that you can shortcut the principles God has set up in the universe. You can't. You can't shortcut. You've got to develop what God has given you. You've got to perfect it. You've got to exercise it. You've got to grow it. You've got to educate yourself. You've got to practice it. You've got to work it. All of that means you have to develop the talents and abilities God has given you, both spiritually and naturally. If you are willing to make personal sacrifices in terms of time and energy and lifestyle, etc., to perfect your game or perfect your talent, then, often slowly, you will grow that talent. And that's what God is talking about. See, there's no shortcuts. These are kingdom principles, but they also happen to be parallel to the principles that are so often understood in secular society in things like leadership and sports and financial management or whatever. So, let's go back to the presupposition. God has given every one of his children a whole bunch of talents, abilities, and gifts, both natural and supernatural. But all of them, without exception, for them to be used at their fullness, for you to operate in that gifting, both natural and spiritual, at a high rate of fruitfulness, okay? In order for you to operate at a high rate of fruitfulness or return or whatever you want to call it, you have to be a master of your game. Not a novice, not an apprentice. You got to practice until you become a master of your game. I'm not talking about that you're like God, but you have to master your game. And there's a price tag in mastering your game. Diligence, sacrifice, discipline, training. Okay? And whether you want to be a film director, a screenplay writer, an actress, whether you want to work on Wall Street, whether you want to be an entrepreneur or an engineer, whether you want to start your own business, whether you're I could tell you the number of people that I've met who, when I met them, had jobs or careers or occupations that the world would not necessarily stand up and cheer about, okay? I have met waitresses and waiters who have mastered, while they were waiters and waitresses, they've mastered the disciplines of people skills and customer service, and they've become masters of the art of customer service and people skills. They're highly gifted. Why? Because they've slaved away at some coffee shop or restaurant. And I'm not knocking these particular restaurants, but just to give you an idea, they might work at an IHOP or something like that, or maybe a higher end restaurant. And after dealing with customers for years, they are fluid. They know how to deal with people. And it's not an accident they get very high tips. Now, at the same time, I have met quite often vice presidents, CEOs, general managers. I've had the opportunity to meet men and women who have big titles and work for big corporations or big institutions, either in government or in private business. Now, this is not always the case, by the way. Many times these individuals that I meet who have the big titles and they have thousands of people working for them and they call the shots. I mean, I don't get into this, but I can't tell you how many times I've called up the phone and personally, I'm not saying this to brag, okay? I'm saying this to say, I'm saying this to illustrate my lifestyle. You can do it too. I'm the type of person that if I have a problem with something and I call a company and the company has lousy customer service, it ticks me off, okay? Because there was a time in my career, many, many, many decades ago, where I was a professional sales trainer and a professional motivator of salespeople and trained them and produced videos, training videos for corporations that would train salesmen. And so I became an expert not only in salesmanship and motivation and the techniques of people skills, etc., because I studied from the best and I also learned from the worst. And so customer service and salesmanship and people skills is just something, it's like a hobby now. I observe it everywhere I go, whether it's good or bad. So many times I'll meet somebody with a big title, maybe the VP of the company, maybe the CEO of the company, maybe the regional sales manager or whatever. I would have to say most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, people, male or female, who are in those positions got there through a combination of reasons. They either worked hard and they were promoted from within, those are usually the smart companies, and they deserve their title and power. Sometimes people get their title and power because they're of nepotism, they're the son or daughter of the boss or the CEO. Or many times people get their title and position because they went to an Ivy League school or a very high-end university where, an authoritative degree was given to them, and people assume because they're a graduate of Yale or Harvard that they know what they're talking about. And in some cases they do, but I would say it's very dicey. In many cases, they are very substandard in their people skills and their sales skills, etc., etc. They've got the title, but they really don't have what it takes in terms of exceptional people skills, salesmanship, etc. And unfortunately, that has become increasingly common because usually they're the sons and daughters of affluent CEOs, and they got a shortcut in the position. Now, I say all that to say that even though that's a business that I've long since been out of, it's like a hobby. I study it, etc. I can't help not study it and observe it. And the thing that I've learned is that the individual, title is one thing. And everybody who has a job understands this. Every one of you who have ever worked for a company, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've probably worked for people who have had the title and they've had the position, but they didn't deserve it. They got it however they got it, but they didn't deserve it because they really don't have the people skills, the salesmanship, the leadership ability, or whatever necessary to be effective in their job. They got the title because they were related or somebody paid for them to go to a fancy school. And therefore they don't really have the respect or loyalty of the employees, and they make inferior decisions. And a lot of corporate decisions and policies that you and I bump into in everyday life when we call a major corporation on the phone or a major institution on the phone, you can tell what I call, it's not what I call, I didn't invent it, but you can observe what is called the corporate culture. Every corporation, every institution, even religious groups and denominations have like an internal, it's almost like an internal tribalistic culture of habits and attitudes that are good or bad. It's called a corporate culture. If the corporate culture is good, motivation is high, productivity is high, excellence is high, achieving goals is high, people skills is high, salesmanship is high, etc., etc. If the corporate culture is toxic because it's built by men and women who don't really belong in their positions, they just got it because they went to Ivy League schools or whatever, the corporate culture is toxic and harmful to that company. Now, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I can't tell you how many times, because you see, this is something that's more than a passing interest to me. It's something that I studied, something that I practiced, something that I taught, something that I lived for years. And I can't tell you how many times I've called just some ordinary person. It could be an investment company, it could be a bank, it could be a manufacturer or whatever. I can think of one particular company right now. You would know their names. I'm not going to give their name for obvious reasons. Let me drop a hint. This company once had a reputation for being the most innovative, cutting-edge software development company in the world. And the person who formerly owned it, I still has the controlling stocks, is a household name. And the chances are very high that you use this company's operating system in your computer, because the name of their company is a household word. But I began to observe something about this company after they began to experience success. I would call with a problem or a challenge that usually related to the fact that something that they designed did not work or did not function properly or did not interact with another piece of technology or software that it was supposed to interact with. There was a glitch. There were problems. And so I began to notice that whenever I called this company, I would call up polite. I was treated with rudeness, arrogance. Most often, nobody ever returned my phone call. I would be put on hold for an hour, and nobody ever responded. And believe me, I have the right phone numbers. And so I had to call continually. Now, most of the time, if and when I did get through with this particular company, by the way, I no longer buy their products. I haven't bought their products in 10, 15 years. No, I'm not a big shot. I'm not going to hurt their bottom line. But people like me, multiplied by the millions, will hurt their bottom line. And it became obvious to me that a company and upper management and CEOs that are responsible for creating a corporate culture in which customer service is not important at all, where excellence is not important, where integrity in what you say and are you going to do what you say, integrity is non-existent. Integrity in what you're manufacturing electronically, it's not there. What you say or claim your technology can deliver doesn't. It's filled with glitches. It doesn't match up with this component or that component like it's supposed to. And like the philosophy of the American automobile industry for decade after decade, there was a long time companies like Ford and other big American automobile manufacturer companies for many years, when faced with the aggressive competition of the Japanese early on, for decades, the big American automobile manufacturers, they had this philosophy that they would manufacture cars, they would not bother to inspect them properly, and this was a calculated move. In order to save hundreds of millions of dollars in costs, they would simply ship out, knowing full well a certain percentage of the brand new cars that they were shipping out were defective and would need repairs or replacement parts. But they made an executive decision at the very top not to take care of those problems up front like they should have if they had integrity, but to wait until the average customer experienced a problem, which forced the average customer who put their trust in them to go to the dealership and get it repaired, and they would repair it. Sometimes they would not even charge for it. But they put the burden of doing the final inspection of the integrity of their automobile on the customer. They made the customer go through the hell of trying to get it repaired. And they knew when they released these automobiles off the assembly lines that a very large percentage of them were going to have defects that would show up within 6 months. But this became the standard way of doing business in America. And it was a short-sighted process, because in the short term, well, they saved millions and millions of dollars. because they didn't have to go through that final rigorous inspection. But in the long term, American cars especially gained a well-deserved reputation. It's changed now, but back then, American cars deserved a well-earned reputation for making inferior products where they released cars knowing that there were problems, technological problems, and things that weren't right. But they would release the car anyway because they found it more cost-effective to release the car to consumers than have the consumers call in and schedule repair appointments afterwards. You see, that's short-term thinking, and that is thinking that's based on a lack of integrity, on a lack of honesty. Okay? Who comes up with a policy like that? We're talking about not just one car company in America, a whole bunch. The people who came up with these policies were the CEOs, the CFOs, and the heads of the big American automobile manufacturers. Many of them, and their vice presidents and so on, they collectively came up with this policy of producing and manufacturing cars that they knew had built-in defaults, but instead of correcting them on the assembly line, they left them hanging so that the customer would have to discover them, and the customer would have to go through all the grief and anguish of getting it repaired. Now think about the mentality that does that. That is a mentality, by the way, that in the truest sense of the word does not represent a biblical worldview. A biblical worldview is one in which excellence and virtue and honesty and integrity is put right at the top. In fact, you could even make it simpler. A biblical worldview is one in which you love your neighbor as yourself. And you say, Paul, well, what is loving your neighbor as yourself? What does it have to do with the biblical worldview? Absolutely everything if you understand your Bible. And there is a mathematical relationship between profit and loss, earning market share, the growth of a company, the branding of a company, the success of a company, is totally related to things like integrity, honesty, and loving your neighbor as yourself. Now, you'll never hear that in the corporate world because they think that they're superior in their arrogance to old-fashioned words like love your neighbor as yourself. But if they were to simply use the words that sound somewhat old-fashioned today in the automobile business, which is love your neighbor as yourself, and they actually employed that as a manufacturing, marketing, sales, and part of their corporate philosophy, their sales would go through the roof, their profit would go through the roof, their market share, they would keep exploding, and their economic growth would be unprecedented. But because the heads of these companies don't think biblically, they don't have a biblical worldview, or they're unable to connect a biblical worldview with the realities of marketing and manufacturing, they have a short-term mentality, which is a shortcut mentality, where they think, see, God created the universe and laws and the world. He created them into the substance and fabric of the world. They think through their pride they can shortcut the principles of God, sell an inferior product to the customer, and then when the customer experiences all the aggravation of buying something falling apart, the customer now has animosity and anger towards that company, whether it's Ford, Chevrolet, or whatever, and speaks badly about that company to their neighbors and friends. And guess what? It shouldn't be a mystery. It shouldn't be an accident that these American automobile companies very quickly began to lose their integrity in the global marketplace of automobile manufacturing, and more formally American car buyers began to start buying Japanese cars, because the Japanese cars, in many respects, operated on the principles of integrity and loving their neighbor as thyself, in the sense that the Japanese manufacturers were making cars that did not break down, cared enough about their customer to fix the problem before they sell it, which all could be translated as loving your neighbor as yourself. If you really love your neighbor as yourself, why would you sell them a car that you know is going to have a malfunction shortly down the road? So the Japanese sales exceeded the American sales. And the Japanese, which were once the laughing joke of manufacturing, suddenly became known for making superior cars that were reliable and didn't break down. And the American automobile industry, in its pride and arrogance that thought it could take a shortcut by cheating the customer and by not valuing integrity and not loving thy neighbor as thyself, they suffered for decades. They've just started to pull out of that. Okay? So these are principles that shouldn't be just locked up in the sphere of religiosity and super spirituality. And let me repeat that again. These biblical principles that God created and designed, not only for peoples and cultures and societies, but God designed them as the inherent factors of productivity, multiplication, ultimate economic growth, societal growth in societies. These are principles that God instituted way back in Genesis. And it's rooted in godly principles like integrity, honesty, truthfulness. Okay? So when you make products, or when you deliver customer service, or whatever you do, that carries with it integrity, customer service. You automatically have profit. You automatically have economic growth. And it took a long time for the American automobile manufacturers, after they took a sound beating from the Japanese companies for decades. It's only been recently that they have started to make their cars with the same integrity that the Japanese do. Now, I'm not saying the Japanese cars are perfect. They're not. And I'm not going to name names, but in my lifetime, I have bought and sold, I don't mean sold personally, sold back to the dealership, because I've had multiple jobs and careers during my lifetime in both ministry and as a feature film producer and as an author and as a conference speaker and as a radio talk show host. It has demanded that I drive often 180 miles a day, round trip to work. And it has demanded that I sometimes am on the road driving 12 hours a day. Okay? Now, in order to do that, I had to recycle just about every car I bought or leased once a year, because I would put easily 100,000 plus miles on the average car that I bought because of my insane mileage requirements in driving. And I learned something very quickly. I bought a whole bunch of cars because, different car dealerships wanted to advertise on my program, because our program was the Paul McGuire Show was very successful in selling high-end and relatively high-end products and services like financial services and cars, etc. So I began to buy every year different cars. Some were American, some were Ford, some were Chevrolets, some were Nissans, some were Corollas. And in a nutshell, this is what I found out. This is just my experience, so I'm not saying it's a truism. Every car that I bought that was an American car, by the time I got close to 100,000 miles, the American cars, without exception, began to fall apart in serious ways, like water pumps going out, hoses burning out. These were brand new cars. And I realized I was driving a ticking time bomb. I realized there was no integrity in the manufacturing and the building of these cars. And it was always American cars. I will name one. I will say this, the Fords were average, until a friend jokingly told me that Ford stands for fix something, problem daily or something. They were okay. They weren't great. They didn't have high integrity. I bought some expensive Fords because, we at that time we needed SUVs. We had 3 kids. And I forgot the name of them. They were the big SUV Fords. I forgot what they were called. You know the name. But I began to see when I would take them into a repair shop for something minor, the mechanic would point out what was coming, and I would have to trade them in at a dealer. I remember buying a brand new Chevrolet. I forgot what it was. Was it a Chevrolet? Excuse me, no. It was a brand new Chrysler. This is about 7 years ago. I had it like 6 months, 4 months. Because of my round-trip commute to the radio station in KBRT in Costa Mesa, I was putting a ton of mileage on it. Now, what happened was, I had I think it was 36,000 miles on it, okay? Which was like 1,000 miles over their they bragged about this powertrain warranty or whatever they called it, which covered all the major problems in the car, for, I guess, don't quote me exactly, but it was something like this, 36,000 miles, all right? So I noticed I'm having transmission problems, and my car actually stops. This is a brand new car. I mean, it's just this brand spanking new. 36,000 miles in LA is like nothing. I noticed there's transmission problems, and the car finally stops in the freeway driving home from Costa Mesa in bumper-to-bumper traffic. I bring it to a transmission repairman. He says to me, your transmission is going completely bad. There is no point in repairing it. He said, you need to have your transmission replaced either with a rebuilt one or with a new one. And the price was very, very hefty. Okay? And I'm saying to myself, how on earth can a transmission on a brand new car at around 36,000 miles fall apart? And the mechanic explained to me why it fell apart. He said, Chevrolet wants to produce really good-looking cars that have a lot of torque. They can go from 0 to whatever very quickly. They want them to have a lot of speed, he said. So this was his opinion. So he said what they do is they I don't know the mechanical words, I'm not a mechanic, but they somehow stretch the capacity of the transmission. They force the transmission to produce an acceleration greater than what it was designed for, so the car has punch and can drive fast. And they do that not only in the model I had, they do it on all of their models. So he said, your transmission is out because that's the way they manufacture cars. I said, what do you mean? He said, yes, they don't build the transmissions right because they're looking for performance. They don't care if it burns out. And he said they do that with all their cars. And they have, he said, for over a decade. And I checked up on it, and he was right. For over a decade. They've had the same transmission problems, and they never bothered to fix it. And so, my hard-earned money, everything else, I have to toss in that car to a dealership. I said, no more Chryslers. And I bought either a Nissan or a Corolla because they had better repair records. I made nothing. The trade-in value of that to brand new Chrysler was like nothing because the fact that the transmission burned out made it essentially worthless. If you looked at the car, it was immaculate. Okay? But because the company had no integrity and did this on purpose, I was stuck. Now, I normally bought warranties, but why should I have to buy a warranty for 36,000 miles? Because it was 1,000 miles over the manufacturer's warranty. They refused to cover anything. Now, it just happened to be that this particular Chrysler dealership advertised on my show, and I sold them a lot of cars. So I wrote the manager, I wrote the head of the company saying, hey, I get on the air telling people how great your cars are, and yet I just bought one, and the transmission fried at 36,000 miles. He knew, believe me, he knew about that problem. He didn't even respond to me. Okay, fine. I had to eat the car, and then I made the decision, because every American car that I had purchased, I had had similar problems with. And so, to this day, I never buy American cars. That's fine if you want to do it. I don't do it. I buy a Corolla or something like that. They're not perfect, but the manufacturer integrity is far beyond American ones. So you see, that's that short-term exploitive mentality which has infected American business, which is part of the reason for the economic problems in America. It's not the only reason, but it's part of the reason. Because in America, it's kind of like, make it look good, make it look pretty, and who cares if it lasts, okay? And it's that kind of inherent dishonesty and lack of integrity when it penetrates the marketplace, when it gets into the minds of the salespeople, the representatives, the manufacturers, and the CEOs, and that kind of like virus of lack of integrity spreads across America. Let me tell you something. There's a direct correlation between true spirituality, biblical values, and economic decline. That was just one illustration. I could give you 100. You could probably give me 100 examples of how when America turned its back on God, you see, most people just think of, marital values, sexual values, etc., etc. No, it goes deeper than that. It goes into exchanging a culture of truth for a culture of lying. It goes to things like your word in business means nothing. See, it's got to be legally written. Your word means nothing. A lack of morality, a lack of biblical morality, destroys economies. And yet you'll never hear that taught in Yale or Harvard or anything else, but it's a truism, and God knows it is. Okay, so understand that God knows what he's talking about, and his biblical commandments, his biblical worldview are essential to things like manufacturing, productivity, profit, and the growth of business. If you think that they are not, you're a fool. And that's how important biblical truth is. It's not just about sexual morality, family morality. It's about the core identity of a society. And this is why, if you want to prosper, if you want to succeed, if you want to innovate, if you want to be an entrepreneur, there are no shortcuts. There are not shortcuts in manufacturing, and there's not shortcuts when it comes to the demands of your own personal development. Again, God has given you, as he has given all of his children, a whole bunch of spiritual gifts and natural gifts. But those gifts that God has given you, because he loves you and he wants to bless you by having you use them, will not ever achieve their maximum performance or their maximum potential if they are not deliberately grown and developed by you, which requires practice, usage, studying, self-education, training, experimentation, until you take whatever God has given you, which may be small, but by the time you're finished with it, because you're faithful, God has given you the power to expand and grow the gifting and the talents and abilities that he's given you, so that you may start off with something small, but you can turn it into an empire. That's part of the laws of the kingdom. And if you think you're so smart in your own mind that you can divorce the laws of the kingdom from the laws of economics and market share and growth or whatever, you're rather foolish. So part of the reason America is in a downturn and we're still recovering economically, the trade treaties are a huge part of it, and we've discussed that in other programs. But the essential work ethic, which used to be called the Protestant work ethic, the essential commitment to excellence, to growing your talents and gifts and abilities, the commitment to take what God has given you and grow it and develop it. These are the principles that God has put into our lives and into our world and society and into our nation that make it possible for us to achieve. Each one of us has the potential of achieving exponentially enormous success, productivity, growth, market share, beyond your wildest belief. It's not mysticism, it's not magic, it's the way God has constructed human nature and reality. Now let's just take it one other area. We all look at people and we marvel at how some people, seem to succeed doing what apparently appears to be somewhat mundane jobs. You've probably heard of his name. He's a famous chef. He's a chef and cook to the celebrities. His food is delicious. His name is Wolfgang Puck. Wolfgang Puck, I'm sure you heard of him. They always talk about him during the Academy Awards. He has some restaurants across the United States, and of course his most famous restaurant is in Beverly Hills, and if you go to his restaurant in Beverly Hills, you will meet Wolfgang Puck, because Wolfgang Puck has integrity in his business. And so when he is at his restaurant, not only does he oversee the manufacturing of every plate of food that is served, he will walk from table to table, ask you how your meal was in a gracious way. He will greet you personally, and he will chat with you, because he doesn't have the attitude, I'm a big shot multimillionaire, the head of a massive restaurant chain. No, he sees himself as a servant and as an artist, and as such his food has such a reputation. That is what we're talking about. That is what we're talking about. And you see, it's contrarian to the thinking of the new America, which is be a big shot, hire a PR firm, pull up in the most expensive limo you can, and everybody think you're a great chef. You see, the really great chefs like Wolfgang Puck don't think like that. They know that their customers know there's no correlation between pulling up in an expensive limousine and how good the food is. Their customers are there to taste the quality of his food, and he lays it on the plate in such an attractive way. That's why they're there. They're not impressed with limousines. You see, when you get the mentality that syncs up with the mentality of God, then prosperity, economic growth, creativity, achievement, these factors inherently take care of themselves if you're minding the store of the business that God has given you, and if you're truly taking care of business. And that just doesn't mean counting the money as it comes in. It means making sure that you are delivering an outstanding, exceptional product, whether it's food or insurance or whatever, at a very fair price that is worth the value that people are paying for it. It'll sell itself. See, Christians need to grasp these concepts, because these are not secular or worldly concepts. These are concepts that originated in the Bible and were applied originally by both Jews and Christians, and it produced massive economic growth. Okay, these are essentially Christian principles. So when we talk about a biblical worldview, let's close this thing here. If we're talking about a biblical worldview, we have to understand that a biblical worldview not only has everything to do with, for example, things like the resurrection of Christ, sexual immorality, family values, honesty, truth, purity, things like that. Yes, those are biblical values. Standing for life. Yes, those are biblical values. But biblical values also, a biblical worldview is not just limited to that. A biblical worldview expands into the area of producing an exceptional product or service, economic growth, integrity in interpersonal relationships, integrity in customer service, integrity in salesmanship. See, that's really a biblical worldview. So I want to finalize with this. So I was talking to a bunch of investment firms regarding some money that a modest amount of money that my father. I was trying to find out if my father had left me something, as he said, and it was a modest amount. But I was treated so rudely and so impersonally by the investment company. And this is what I do. I don't know what you do. But I don't play games when I talk to people in this. I break the ice. It doesn't always work. Okay? But this is how I deal with things. Because you see, I have compassion for people who are trapped and forced to behave like robots by their short-sighted employers. So I could tell this young lady who was probably 30-something, it was late, she wanted to get home, it was in Manhattan, I was trying to have her look something up, and I said to her, do you mind if I ask you a question? And I said, please don't be offended. I said, look, I know your company is forcing you to say what you're saying, because you sound like you're reading from a script. I mean, you sound like you've got a piece of paper in your hand, and you're just reading sentence by sentence, chapter by chapter, what they want you to tell the customer, but your heart isn't into it. And I said to her, I'm not going to tell anybody, I said, but just tell me the truth. Do you get tired of feeling like a robot, being treated like a robot, and being forced to, in a sense, lie to your customers with these robotic answers? I do this kind of dynamic all the time, by the way. Sometimes people freeze, they slam the door in my face, and I move on. But I'd say the majority of the time, they all of a sudden melt, because I gave her permission to be free. I gave her permission to be herself. And she just expressed to me how she really felt. And she confided in me, she says, I hate doing this. She says, I'm looking for a different job. It was a major banking institution. She said, I hate doing this. I feel like I'm being forced to lie to the customers. I have to read from the script that they give us. Everybody who works here has to read from the script that they give us. And she said, it's not true. They tell us to lie to the customers. And she said, the customers get angry. I don't have any personal fulfillment. I feel like I'm just like a robot. It's dehumanizing. It's like, it's a terrible job. Now, she talked more, and I didn't criticize her, and I empathized with her, and I could feel that was like healing for her. It was like healing for her. She could just be honest. And I said to her, because I knew the conversation was taped, I said, you're not saying this, I am. And I said, and I'm not worried about what I'm saying because I don't work for your company. And I said, but the corporate culture in your company has obviously been developed by some very greedy and short-sighted people. And unfortunately, you have to suffer, and the customers have to suffer. And I kind of encouraged her to pursue other careers. And she took a deep breath of relaxation, like 100 pounds was taken from her shoulder, because probably for the first time in a long time, she was able to talk to a customer who didn't beat her up, but understood that she was being forced to say all this stuff that she knew wasn't true. And it was freeing for her to just have a moment to tell somebody the truth. You see, that's an odd form of ministry, but it's a form of ministry. And you may say, well, did you tell her about Jesus Christ? Many times I do, but I wait until the relationship has been developed that gives me permission to say that. But you see, that's setting people free, because there's a corporate mentality out there that is forcing their employees to behave like robots without souls and to lie to their customers. Don't think for a minute when you don't condemn somebody and you give them permission to speak the truth and you promise them you're not going to, get them in trouble. Don't underestimate the freeing power of her being able to just not have to act like this robot. She hated it. You could tell she was torn up inside, and so are so many other people. Now, that's an unorthodox approach, but you see, I feel that it's a valid ministry to relate to people like a loving, caring human being who happens to be a Christian, and if that comes up, I will share Christ. It frees them up. It's just like small. It's one person at a time, but they're set free because they don't like what they're being forced to do. And in a sense, you're liberating them. And this is a very small thing, but you see, if it becomes contagious, you can change a society. You see, the people who are at the top, they benefit when they force their employees to lie and act like robots. They don't want them to act like people. Just something to think about. And you know what? It'll make you feel better too, as long as you're not venting and going crazy on them. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire, and we are talking about an all-pervasive matrix of control that dominates our society and other societies in the world. And we're talking about practical things that you and I can do, both spiritually and in terms of like being friends to people, that can set them free. Now you say, well, I don't see how that sets people free. Trust in the power of truth. Trust in the power of God to move through people. Believe me, people don't have conversations like that. But this matrix, you see, has been designed by the globalist elite, Huxley called the scientific dictatorship, for their benefit. When they force millions and millions of people to act like robots, what they're really doing is forcing them to act like slaves. They're not allowed to be human. And it's psychologically stressful. They go home with nightmares. They have fights with their husbands or wives. It contributes to the divorce and affair epidemic. You say, how does it do all that, Paul? Well, you have to think deeper than most Christians do. A lot of Christians are saying, well, I'm against divorce, I'm against this, I'm against that. Well, I understand that, but think about what is it in their environment that is producing the intense psychological stresses that are leading to depression, leading to anxiety, leading to affairs and divorce and all the rest of the stuff, the drinking and stuff. I'll tell you what a part of it is. When you're forced to show up at work early in the morning, leave late at night, you're a mother or a husband or whatever, and you're forced to act like a robot, which means you're not allowed to be a human being, and you're forced to read a script from your company, which you know is based on a bunch of lies, that psychologically eats at you in a bad way. And then there's a blowout. Ulcers, nervous breakdowns, everything else. People were not created by God to be slaves, to be in captivity, and to be treated like robots. That is what the elite, this is not conspiratorial, it's real. That's what the elite, that's how they've set up the system. It's for their benefit. They want the maximum profit from you, even if it means at the cost of destroying you personally. That's what it's all about. And Christianity is truth, and the truth shall set you free. But that truth of winning people to Jesus Christ, it's not, we don't walk around with like robotic preaching methods. How you win people to Christ is you're real in front of them. How you win people to Christ is you take time to develop a relationship with somebody. You're real, who you really are. You're not a phony. And out of the context of the trust that is built between you and somebody else because they notice that you're the real deal and not a phony, Then they open up. Then they trust you. And because they open up and trust you, then and only then are they receptive to hearing about the truth of Jesus Christ and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because you've earned their trust. You haven't come across like some religious robot. You're somebody they can relate to. And this spreads like wildfire, by the way. It really does. That's why Jesus Christ said, be fishers of men. What he meant was, saving souls is somewhat like being a fisherman. You need the right bait. You need to cast the bait in the right area. And it requires a little skill. And then it's fun. It's fun to see people set free. It's fun to talk to somebody like on the phone, and the next thing you know, they're laughing with joy. And the whole time before, you could feel they were just so constricted, they were suffocating. Now they're laughing with joy, and when they're laughing with joy, you can mention something about Jesus Christ, and it's acceptable, because you've won their trust and friendship. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Jesus Christ said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. The spiritual battle that we're involved in our society is all about speaking the truth in love, speaking truth to power. In every battlefield in our society, whether it's the political arena, the media arena, the business world, the educational world, what it's really about is people who have power, who have conspired, who have organized, who are promoting and indoctrinating you and your children with lies because it's the way they get to keep their power. But if you use the wisdom that God has given you and walk under the anointing of the Holy Spirit, God can give you some very simple strategies to do an end run around the lie and present people with the truth in a way that they're interested in. You see, it's a competitive spiritual battlefield because as we are, in a sense, selling the truth, I don't like the analogy, but it's true. In a sense, we're presenting the truth, but we're competing with the messages of the lust, the greed, the materialism sold in advertising in our culture. But people aren't happy by those things. People have an intrinsic need to be loved by a pure love, which is the agape love of Jesus Christ. And if you and I don't make ourselves available to love them with the agape love of Jesus Christ, guess what? Nobody else will do it. And we get the privilege of doing it. Visit paulmcguire.us, that's paulmcguire.us, and you can download this program, and you should. You should say, Lord, who do I know that needs this program? And if you're honest, there's probably 25 people minimum who need this program. And then, Lord, what groups could I send this program into that need to hear it? And I'm asking you to do this for one reason. As I've shared with you on other programs, there is literally an Orwellian army of algorithms and bots and control mechanisms created and generated by the search engine companies, the social media companies, that are deliberately blocking off the truth and censoring the truth. And the only way we can beat that, because you see, the search engines aren't automatically feeding things to people like they used to. If they smell that it's Christian or conservative in any way, they will make your message, your post, or whatever disappear. So the only way we can reach people is if you personally endorse a message and you send it through your own private Facebook or YouTube or whatever, without some highly charged political title or whatever. Because if you do that, they'll just shoot it down and it'll go into non-existence. This is the war for truth that you and I are facing. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. I have an important announcement in just a minute. But remember, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. Once again, you're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. And before we continue with opening up the power of truth in your life and literally revolutionizing your life for the good. I want to remind you that coming up this week, very important, coming up this week, starting Friday, this Friday, March 16th, 2018, starting at 9 a.m. sharp, I'll be kicking off the beginning session of the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference. And I'll be speaking a whole bunch of times, man. And I have some very powerful, truthful messages to give that deal with prophecy, America, and why God has placed President Donald Trump into office. Is there a mission that God intends for him to fulfill? I believe there is. I'm not sure that all Christians understand that. And so I co-wrote a book called Trumpocalypse with my good friend, Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist Troy Anderson. We also wrote the Babylon Code together. And Trumpocalypse is the #1 selling prophecy book in the world, and it's #1 in about 14 other major categories also. It's selling like crazy all around the world, despite the fact that I have personally been viciously attacked by the radical leftist media and other things, which, quite frankly, I don't really care about. I mean, what do I care? Why would I care if the radical leftist media, financed by people like Soros, is attacking me? Why would I care? You know why they're attacking me? Are they attacking me because I'm telling the truth? No. They're attacking me because they perceive that Trumpocalypse is a threat to their, and they wouldn't admit this because they're in self-deception. They perceive that the book Trumpocalypse is a potential threat to their plans for a regime change. That's their words in America, where they intend to throw Trump out of office or impeach Trump out of office or something worse. And they perceive that our book Trumpocalypse is a potential threat to their totalitarian agenda. And it's really very sad, you know, because I grew up a leftist. I was a radical leftist when I was a young man. That's the household I grew up in New York City. I came from an atheistic household of radical leftists and activists, artists, intellectuals. And I was demonstrating with the radical activist Abby Hoffman when I was 15, much to the dismay of these radical leftists who like to criticize me. I actually have credentials within the radical left that are of a far higher order than their credentials. And that really burns them up. So, for example, I was made a member of the Black Panther Party when I was 16 years old. I was demonstrating with Abby Hoffman when I was 15 years old. I was there in a secret and private meeting with the radical activist leaders of Earth Day in Manhattan as they planned for the Earth Day celebrations. I was involved in so many high-level meetings with radical activists, all different kinds, famous people. The poet Allen Ginsberg, Ken Kesey, the author of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and the psychedelic drug bus Further, hanging out with Dr. Timothy Leary in the East Village. I mean, on and on and on. And talking to these people, meeting with them. Many of these people, you know, who attack me, many of them are younger than me. And it's kind of embarrassing for them, because I remember debating a female radio talk show host who was a African-American activist. And, you know, her strategy was to was predictable. She was trying to demonize me as a white conservative radio talk show host who didn't know anything about the black struggle or civil rights and so on and so forth. But that really wasn't the truth. Now, she did what she could to perpetuate a lie, because only by perpetuating a lie could she win the argument. But I wearied of that, and I just simply interrupted her, and I told her the truth. I said, because she was talking about the Black Panther Party, I said, I was a member of the Black Panther Party. She scoffs on camera. It was a big show on Fox News. And I said, yes, that's true. I was a member of the Black Panther Party. And she kind of wanted to hear more because she didn't believe it. Well, the first thing I found out is she didn't even know the historical leaders who were famous of the original Black Panther Party. I knew who the leadership was. She had no clue, which told me she was completely uneducated regarding the real history of much of the black civil rights activism movement, such as the names of the famous Black Panthers. These were the people who were the thinkers, not the Black Lives Matter group, okay, that's Soros-funded Jim Jones cult, not the Black Panthers today, which are, intellectually like nothing. The original Black Panthers had brains. I mean, I read the book Soul on Ice by the Minister of Communications for the Black Panther Party. It was a brilliant book, Elridge Cleaver, and he and I corresponded. And I was in communication with other intellectual, sharp Black Panther leaders. And when she heard my story, it was true, because I said things that only somebody who had been on the inside could have known. But the point I'm trying to make is she had to maintain the lie that I was some, privileged, which I'm not, white guy. But I paid my price. I was there, man. I was demonstrating with the Black Panthers in solidarity with their message. A message she couldn't even remember existed. So I get criticized by these leftists. What they do is that Soros and the other groups pay these leftists, and they work for these leftist organizations. And, they have reasonably good journalistic skills, and they'll lift things that you say out of context, and then they'll spread it all over the internet in an attempt to take you down. But the problem is they're intellectual lightweights. I mean, they always talk a big game. They thump their chests, and they're very arrogant, but it rings hollow because they really don't know what they're talking about. They don't understand the philosophies, the historical realities, the leaders, the ideologies, which has produced the modern progressive leftist socialist movement. They're clueless. I mean, I'm fluent in this, okay? I understand it completely because I lived through it at the age of 15 and 14 years old. They don't even realize that, and they're trolls. See, they get paid a certain amount of money every month, and then they scour the internet looking for anybody that challenges a liberal or a Democrat or a radical position, and then they take their words or video out of context and they try to tear them down by lying about them and demonizing them. And there must be thousands of these people. And they're financed, if not by Soros directly, people like Soros. And they're working hand in glove with Google, Facebook, and the rest. And they're also working hand in glove with the mainstream media and many newspapers and magazines, etc. The problem is, to be blunt, they're intellectually one-dimensional, intellectually two-dimensional at best. In other words, when I was part of the left, and I was in the left when I was 15 years old, it consisted of a very highly energized group of people that were thinkers and writers and intellectuals and readers. These people are not. They're shallow. They're shallow people. And so they don't have the intellectual firepower. They think they do because they're delusionary in terms of their education. But they don't recognize, for example, that they have become this contemporary, less leftist, progressive movement, which is targeting Trump, targeting Christians, targeting gun control, targeting everything. They don't understand because they don't have the intellectual development, or they weren't around, and they're not real thinkers. They're pseudo-thinkers. They don't understand, for example, that it was the left, under people like the radical activist, leftist leader Mario Savio at the University of Berkeley in the 1960s, who created the revolutionary leftist movement called the Free Speech Movement, the Berkeley Free Speech Movement. And the entire thundering message of the left and the progressives was this, that every man or woman in America and the world has the right to free speech, to say whatever they want to say in print, on television and radio and demonstrations, that every person has the right to say whatever they want to say without fear of recrimination or censorship, whether you like their ideas, whether you agree with their ideas or not. That was a central tenet in their belief system, by the way. And it happened to connect with the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech. So back then, the left would fight for your right as a Christian to talk about Christianity. They may not agree with it, but they fought for your right to say it, because their primary belief was you had the right to say whatever you believed, and you had the right not to be censored. Okay? This was a key tenet, and this is what gave them power. They had enormous power back then because they had the intellectual credibility to be the champion of free speech, not just to be the champion of free speech that agrees with their Marxist, progressive, socialist vision. No, they've turned it upside down today. They've turned what Mario Savio and the others called the free speech movement into a censorship fascist movement, where if you say anything that is a departure from the officially approved, politically correct message, politically correct ideas, if you deviate from the official script that is developed by the progressive leftist leaders and the Marxist leftist professors, if you say anything that deviates from their Marxist progressive agenda, they will demonstrate you, they will kick you out from speaking, they will boycott you, they will denounce you, they will do everything they can to destroy you as an individual and to destroy your message. This is not the pure leftism that had power when I was 14 and 15. It is the opposite of it. If the leftist leaders of that time, enough of them were still alive, they would wake up in horror and look at these armies of darkness that have become the modern left and progressive movement, where they're controlled like fascists into politically correct thinking. And if you depart from politically correct thinking, you are subject to all kinds of very, very serious negative things. The modern left, because of the lack of education of the contemporary leftist or contemporary journalist, is completely unaware of the fact that their movement began as a movement for free speech, no censorship. But now it's morphed into a totalitarian movement which is fascist in nature. And when I say fascist in nature, the modern left, the modern progressives, the modern socialists are as fascist as the Nazis were in censoring all free speech. Remember the news pictures of the Nazis burning books that were books, anything they didn't agree with? Well, the modern left is just as fascist as the Nazis. Okay? They are totalitarian. They are the people that George Orwell warned about in 1984. They are the thought police. They're very dangerous because they've changed. Their DNA has changed. They're fascists, they're totalitarians, and they are marching goose step into the belief system or ideology upon which most Marxist, progressive, and leftist ideologies always end up in the same direction, and that is they begin burning books, destroying books, smashing store windows, arresting people, throwing them in jail, silencing, burning up newspapers, shutting down films, boycotting films, attacking people, beating people, killing people, and arresting people who don't agree word for word with their political dogma. They become the new fascist revolutionaries. We saw it in communist Russia, we saw it in Cuba, we saw it in China, and we've seen it in every communist nation since. The left has now become a Frankenstein. They've become their own worst nightmare. But they can't recognize it because they're so deeply brainwashed and indoctrinated. And you know, I debate these people, and it's like debating fascist robots in some kind of Westworld virtual reality. You can't reason with them because they don't reason. You can't reference history because they don't know anything about history. You can't reference the leaders they espouse their following, like the Black Panther leaders, so on and so forth, because they don't even know the names of these people. They have become the night of the living dead. They have become the day of the dead. They have become the zombies. And what they really don't understand is the way the game really works, and they're clueless. They're suckers. They don't understand the way the game really works. And the way the game really works is that the left, just like the fascist right, has always been used by the international banking family elite, the globalist elite. The left and the fascist right have always been used by the super rich elite to create a revolution which allows the international banking families and the globalist elite to have dictatorial control of nations like China, Russia, Germany, Cuba, etc., where they own the government, they can loot the governments of all the wealth, they can create massive slave labor, and they own all the natural resources under the phony guise of promising the proletariat workers a workers' paradise, which never happens, and by promising them social justice and redistribution of wealth, which of course never happens. What happens is, for example, in the last 125 years, 250 million deaths, tortures, suicides, starvations by this fascist left. They're very dangerous. And where they're the most dangerous is you see them. These are the people that have the mentality that are in the mainstream news media. These people are fraudulent. They have no depth of thinking. They have programmed personalities. They are simply paid to destroy Trump or paid to destroy anything that would attempt to roll back the plans for this fascist one-world government and one-world socialist society, which is not designed for the benefit of anybody but the globalist elite. That's reality. Anyway, you need to come out to the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference, and this is free. This is hour after hour of teaching from some of the best Bible prophecy teachers of the world. The topics are incredible. I will be teaching on all kinds of topics dealing with Trumpocalypse and the deep state and the world brain and all kinds of things that will really open your eyes. Chris Pinto, a brilliant documentary filmmaker. I've watched many of his movies about the true Christian founding of the United States of America and what they are lying to you about and our children. Mike Hogarth, incredible Bible teacher and preacher. He's going to be teaching on a whole bunch of new subjects this year. He's a genius and a wealth of information when it comes to the reality of what the Freemasons and the Masons are really all about, what the Illuminati is really all about. Jay Seegert, who's going to talk about technology and biology and creation on a whole different level. I mean, what these guys have to say is so dynamic and so explosive. It is not what you hear in your typical church service. And you can watch, it's endless hours of constant live streaming video, absolutely free. Absolutely free. And all you got to do, I'll make it simple for you. You go to paulmcguire.us. I'm simply saying that because that's my website, paulmcguire.us. You'll see a big banner ad for the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference. You click that, it will take you to the main page of the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference. You want to do it in advance because you want to get hooked up for the free live streaming. Okay, it's free. But then you also, if you're anywhere near, when I say near, I'm talking about anywhere 10 hours away from Moorhead, Minnesota, where they're going to hold the conference live at the Moorhead, Minnesota Marriott Courtyard Conference Center, you need to come. It's free. You'll meet the speakers, you'll meet me, you'll meet other brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. And I want to just tell you something. Watching a conference live streaming is great, if that's all you can do. But the real power and richness of a Bible prophecy conference is when you get to experience it and to fellowship with people and experience the move of the power of God and the Holy Spirit in person. If you can physically make it there, you need to be there, because the level of exposure that you will have to powerful Bible teachers and fellowshipping with other Christians and experiencing the move of God and the presence of God in a room with fellow believers, it's that being there that will change your life forever. Now, I speak from personal experience because for most of my life, I made a rule with myself. I learned it from Jack Hayford. The rule was this: if I knew that God would be moving in a special way and powerfully in a particular location, and I would be able to hear some of the best Bible prophecy teachers in the nation speak, I wanted to be physically around that. I didn't want to just watch it on television. I wanted to be physically around that, because there's something about how you become changed when you're physically around it. And there's no way to describe it. So as a matter of routine for most of my life up until today, I think nothing of driving 10 hours each way to physically attend a Bible prophecy conference. I think nothing of it. Because let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you what happened when I began to do that. I realized that my spiritual growth skyrocketed. My growth in the Lord skyrocketed because I put myself in a physical environment where I could grow spiritually. And I can tell you right now, the Lord would never have raised me up to be an international Bible teacher and speaker. He would never have raised me up to do all the things that I'm doing today had I not made that investment of obedience to Him and got in my car and drove 10 hours or whatever each way to attend these Bible prophecy conferences and other conferences. I did that for decade after decade, and I don't regret it, because if I hadn't done it, I would never have become the man of God I was supposed to become. I would never have met the people that I should have met in terms of networking and opening doors. So you need to physically be there. Now, they have their own website. You can send that out also. But for the sake of remembering it quickly, simply go to paulmcguire.us. paulmcguire.us. You'll see a big ad for the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference, the list of speakers. There's a complete list of topics and times, and the topics are hot for the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference. And then what I'm asking you to do personally, and the other prophecy teachers are asking you to do personally, I'm asking you to take up the challenge and take seriously the Great Commission of Jesus Christ and go into all the world and preach the gospel. Not every one of us are called to be like one-on-one evangelists. Not every one of us are called to lead people to Christ from a stage or whatever. But every single one of us, without exception, are called to lead people to Christ. And in fact, God gives those of us that are faithful in winning people to Jesus Christ a soul winner's crown at the judgment seat of Christ. We're actually rewarded for our faithfulness in soul winning. And that's a serious thing. That's when you'll hear the words from Jesus Christ to you personally, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." Now, that is not just given from the Lord to those people who, they personally led someone to Christ, or they were the ones on TV, or they were the ones on the stage that won somebody to Christ. That is given to all the people who did something behind the scenes, who did something to lead people to Christ that nobody knew about. God is no respecter of persons. If you were faithful to make it happen behind the scenes, you share in that soul winner's reward just as much as the person who physically was seen doing it. And that means all you have to do, and I believe this as a fact, but you know why I believe this as a fact? Because it reflects the heart of God. I believe that as I'm speaking to you, the Lord is going to begin to bring up people and certain social media groups and people and groups and individuals that you know, because the Lord's going to start bringing them to your heart, and all He wants you to do is spread the link for the free live streaming of the Bible Prophecy Conference, and the link to how they can show up and attend physically the free meeting at the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference in Moorhead, Minnesota. All the maps and directions are at paulmcguire.us. And all you have to do is be the person to send a link to your friends or groups with some kind of personal endorsement from you, because the censorship algorithms are trying to block it. And it's planting seeds. You don't worry about whether it's this seed or that seed that brings fruition. Your job is to take the seeds and spread them, pray over them, and God will you know what will happen? If you're faithful to take a whole bunch of seeds and send the message and the link out of the prophecy conference, a note from you that people need to watch it, it's live streaming, it's free, you throw out a bunch of those seeds, and I can promise you that you will see, you may not hear about it immediately, you may hear about it a year later, but you will see people repent and return to Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. You will see people come back to the Lord. You will see people become born again. You will see people whose lives were changed forever by what they heard at these Bible prophecy meetings. And you'll know in your heart that it was your effort, that you were willingness by faith to plant those seeds, and you had a harvest. There are many times I do similar things for the Lord, okay? I plant seeds, just like I'm asking you to do. And I forget about it. And then a year later, I'll get some email, or I'll read something from somebody that brings tears in my eyes because they came to the Lord, or they were contemplating suicide or something, and I suggested that they watch this prophecy conference or hear this message or whatever, and it changed their eternal destiny. I had long forgotten that I did anything. But what a blessing to receive that. So I'm asking you to help. And then pray. Every time there's souls souls at stake, there's a spiritual battle. So we need your prayers. I need your prayers. The other speakers need your prayers. The conference needs your prayers. And guess what? Be willing to drive a bunch of people to attend the conference. I don't understand it. It's in North Dakota, Moorhead, Minnesota. Okay? Now, in LA, it's hard to get people to drive anywhere. I don't understand that either. Because I've always driven ridiculous amounts of hours in either direction. Why? Because one thing people have always said of me, and it's nothing to do with any inherent virtue on mine, is that I'm hungry for God. And I am hungry from God. I'm hungry from God. And it's not because I'm so pure and holy. You know why I'm hungry for God? Because without the presence of the Holy Spirit, I can't stay sane in this insane world. It feeds me. It charges my spiritual battles. So I hope to personally meet you and shake your hand there. And remember, spread this word. Really spread it. There are powerful forces in the internet that are blocking this kind of message from being out. But if you will put your name and endorse it and tell people, hey, check this out, listen, this is free, and send it out to people that God puts on your heart, we can do an end run around the censors, and together we can win people for Jesus Christ. I've got so much more to say with you, so much exciting stuff, and I'll be sharing a lot of it when I'm speaking, and I'm speaking a lot. I always volunteer at these conferences to speak the most. It's not because I have this ego need to speak the most. It's because I'm passionate about what I want to say, but I always overcommit. But it doesn't matter because it's fun. It's fun. It's fun preaching God's word. But we need your help. Let's really roll this out. Spread the word, and then do. It's like, what is it? The thing with the chain letter. You get people to send the letter. Tell people to send the link out, and you tell them to send the link out, and so on and so forth. The next thing you know, you're one thing if you reach like 1,000 people. That's the way we can do it. Finally, remember this. We live in a media environment where we're being lied to continually. Don't allow the tone of the media, the negative atmosphere of the media, don't allow the messages of the media, which are lies, to contaminate your brain and life and make you oppressed and down. The way things are really happening in America are different than the way the media is making it look like it's happening. The media is trying to lie and make it look like, oh, Trump is causing all this trouble. Everybody hates Trump. Trump is bringing everything down. Oh, America is in its worst days. The media is doing that 24/7 overtime. Do you know why? Of course you know why. Because there's an election coming up very soon, and if the people think everything's going well and things are succeeding, well, then they're going to not vote for the people that they're trying to get them to vote for. So they got to come on with the lie really strong right now. The reality is there's economic growth like has never happened in our country before. And one thing I'm going to address in detail is the scandal thing with Trump. Because you see, that is a plot. That is a strategic operation designed at the very least, because first of all, at this present moment, there's no conclusive proof that he indeed even had a relationship with this girl. All right? No matter what they make it sound like, there's no conclusive proof. Just like there was no conclusive proof over the Russian collusion. How long did they bang the drums over the Russian collusion? Forever. And what did they come up with? Zero. This lady has everything to gain. She makes her money. The more people that know about her and what she does, the more customers she gets, the more her advances are, the more cash she makes. All right? There is no proof that it ever happened. Now, let's take a worst case scenario. Let's say, in a moment of weakness, it did happen. Then the question that has to be asked, how is a true biblical Christian supposed to process that biblically? Do you reject perhaps the greatest champion for Christian freedoms America has ever seen because of a moral failure? Because that's what they want you to do. You understand, of course, that this entire psyops regarding Stormy Daniels, and I have an article I'm putting up on it at paulmcguire.us, and I'll be speaking about it at the conference. You understand, of course, the entire psyops operation around Stormy Daniels is targeted to hit and affect one particular group, and that is a group called the evangelical Christians. The reason for that is that most of America doesn't care, or it's not a big deal to most of America. It may be a big deal to a certain percentage of women, and I'm not minimizing that, but most of America doesn't care. There's a lot of lies here. Bill Clinton raped and molested, 200 women? That is not even on the same equation as Trump, if he had some kind of consensual relationship with this woman, which appears to be, if it happened at all, I'm very skeptical that it happened, that he paid her to do whatever she did. That's a consensual business relationship. But you see, they're very sophisticated, these people. As I said the other day, they understand the Bible more than most Christians. They have done intensive studies. They know how evangelical Christians are going to react regarding certain news announcements. Now, if, let's say, something happened, the only reason they would pursue it or pretend that it happened, even if it was a lie, is because it is this news story, the alleged affair between, not affair, the alleged relationship that Trump had with Stormy Daniels, because he paid her as a prostitute. Let's not forget that. The group in American culture that has the highest likelihood of being negatively affected by that story is the evangelical Christian community. These people are professional psychological operatives. They know that the evangelical Christian community is and has continued to be the greatest supporter of Donald Trump in the elections and voting for him. They need the enemies of Trump understand that they need Trump's support for these other candidates, or they won't make it. They won't win. So the target here is to destroy the trust between Donald Trump and the evangelical Christian community, because the other communities in America really don't care whether he did it or not. Now, what would most offend evangelical Christians? Well, one of the things that would most offend evangelical Christians is if Donald Trump paid a prostitute to do whatever with him, and it turned out to be true. That would offend all evangelical Christians, including myself, because it represents sin, but even more so because it represents the sin of adultery. Okay? And that potentially, if you blew up that story large enough, assuming it was true, could sever, to whatever degree, the relationship between Trump and the evangelical Christians. They know that. That's why they've chosen to fixate on this story. And by the way, for them to succeed, they know full well the story doesn't even have to be true. They know full well that the story, the allegation regarding the prostitute and Trump does not even have to be true in order for it to achieve its desired result, any more than the accusations of the Russian collusion were not true, but it still damaged Trump. You understand what's going down here? So they just got to keep this in the paper constantly, and many Americans will just assume it's true because they keep reading about it, and that will have the effect of doing something to damage the relationship between Donald Trump and the evangelical voter. So, one of the things I pointed out in my article, and I'm going to explain at the conference that you need to tune into, is the mindset, the perception, the wisdom, the analytical ability that the evangelical church, first its leaders must develop, because a lot of them are lacking this, and that the average evangelical Christian and its leadership, they must, at this moment, if they want to see their country saved, rise to a far higher level of perception and analysis of political and social events, such as the alleged relationship between Trump and this prostitute for money. Because the target is not what you think it is. The target is to sever or break off the political support of the evangelical Christians who are supporting Donald Trump. The goal is to destroy that. Because Donald Trump, more than any other U.S. president, has been a champion, a real champion, not a fake one, for Christian values, Christian laws, Christian rights. Trump is the only president from the day he got in office demanded that these extremist nations stop persecuting, raping, and torturing Christian women and men in foreign nations. He demanded it. Trump is the only Christian president who officially recognized Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel. That's huge. Donald Trump is the only president who put his money where his mouth is and actually ordered Google and the other social media. He did it 2 days ago. He ordered the social media, the mainstream media, Google, Facebook, and all these other tech giants. He ordered them to stop censoring Christian news stories, Christian blog sites, Christian Facebooks, etc., etc. He's the only one who's taken on the bullying of these people who are anti-Christian. He's the only one who said, I'm going to get the IRS to back off attacking every Christian church and every Christian pastor who dares to speak out biblically on a political issue. He's the only Christian president who's actually done something about it, and on and on and on. Okay? He is standing up for Christian rights. He is making sure Christians have true freedom of speech, true freedom of religion. The radical leftists, the progressives, are organized with big money from people like Soros. They are doing everything they can to eradicate, stamp out true evangelical Christianity from our nation. That's their goal. They're making it illegal to practice, preach, or talk about Christianity in the educational system, in the media. They're making it illegal to have certain kinds of church meetings. Christians are arrested if they speak out about their faith in any public place. These people are demonically trying to destroy the influence of Christianity and Jesus Christ from the nation of America. There is nothing holding them back but one man, Donald Trump, who has the guts to go against them. He also had the guts to go against the abortion of 60 million babies. Only Donald Trump. Okay? Now, all the fake Christian presidents faked it but did nothing. So you can see that the radical progressives hate him because the radical progressives want to destroy Christianity in America. They've said it. So the radical progressives, who are financed by people like Soros, they know what's really going on. And so what their sneaky strategy is to use diversion and to play on, sorry for saying it this way, but to play on the naivete, ignorance, and sadly to say, the stupidity of many evangelical Christians who can easily be swayed by an emotional story like this Stormy Daniels, Trump saw the prostitute, of which there's no proof, but to get Christians so caught up in that, and then these ungodly atheistic non-Christians are going to use every bit of their media strategy that they can to convince they as atheists are going to set themselves up as the spiritual leaders of evangelical Christians and convince evangelical Christians that Donald Trump is not Christian enough for their support because of Stormy Daniels. This narrative is going to be created by atheists and promoted, even though there's no proof. Because their end game is they want to cause the evangelical Christians to stop supporting and voting for Donald Trump and people that Donald Trump supports. Because if they can do that, then they can destroy Trump's influence, and everything Trump has done good in terms of promoting Christianity, they can roll it back with Antichrist legislation. And it all revolves on getting the Christian community to believe that Donald Trump doesn't truly love God. And they're using the Stormy, whatever her name is, thing to do it. Now, I'm going to explain the two consequences to this outcome. One is, let's take a worst-case scenario, and we have no reason to believe this worst-case scenario at this moment. But let's say he did have some kind of affair with her. You notice how cleverly her advisors told her that to change her story and have her say that she was willing to have a relationship with him for free because she so admired the man, and that her feelings were hurt when he offered to pay her a check. If you believe that slick little lie, I mean, quite frankly, you're helpless. That was deliberately created to humanize her, to make her look virtuous, to make it look like her only motivation for being with Donald Trump and wanting a physical relationship with him was because she kind of had, he was kind of like a hero to her, and she was falling in love with him. See, that kind of makes her virtuous. No. According to their own testimony, she did it for money from the start. Okay? According to her own testimony, she did it for the money. She didn't do it because she thought he was a hero. That's a lie. That's to make her virtuous. She's not virtuous. Otherwise, she wouldn't be in that business. Otherwise, she wouldn't be tearing apart the president, his marriage, and the nation. She's not virtuous. She's got serious operators behind her. That was a lie to sucker punch the evangelical Christians into thinking she was a caring, loving, virtuous woman. The reality is, if indeed Trump had a relationship with her, it was paid, which first of all, I don't believe is valid. I don't think that there's proof that it happened. But you see, if it's paid, it says there was no emotion in it. It was simply, well, we all know what it was. Because, see, their design is to terribly wound Melania and everything else. But see, we really have to remember, there's no proof here. Okay? There's no proof. Just like there's no Russian collusion proof. And in a worst case scenario, if it did happen, what is the perspective of God through the lens of His Word? How does God want His people to react? We know God believes in holiness and righteousness, that's clear. But if we look through history carefully, and we talk about this in Trumpocalypse in great detail, the Bible is filled with accounts of powerful world leaders who were immoral, ungodly, and pagan. Okay? Like the king of Babylon, like Pharaoh, and even King David, who was a man of God. For crying out loud, he murdered the husband of a woman so he could have adultery with her and then lied about it. You couldn't get worse than that. That makes Trump look like a Sunday school teacher. And yet, that doesn't justify the sin of David, but David is the only man in the Bible whom God calls a man after his own heart. So we need to look at this through the bigger perspective of God's Word and understand that there is a far more sinister, demonic, evil game that is being played than the one that most Christians are focusing in on. There's a much bigger, much more demonic game that's being played. Okay? And unless you understand that, unless you understand what the real stakes are, you run the risk of being one of these Christians who does not have a biblical worldview, who's simply going to make a decision on a knee-jerk reaction that is somewhat pharisaical and based on instantaneous legalism. And you may be guilty of destroying a relationship with, yes, an imperfect man who obviously at best is a babe in Christ, and you may be guilty of severing the relationship between him and God's people when he appears to be the only president we have, or have had in my lifetime, who's actually stood for Christ and the people of God. There's a lot there's a lot at stake here, and it's going to require that you have real wisdom. And if you're looking to the media, if you're looking to NBC and ABC and Barbara Walters and all these people who first of all, by their own admission, are not born again. They don't have the Spirit of God in them. They don't love the Lord. They don't have the Holy Spirit in them. They advocate openly champion and promote so many things that are directly against the Word of God, these media queens and kings. And you're looking to them to spoon feed to you what morality is? I mean, if that's what you're doing, you are walking on burning hot coals. They have a strategy. Remember, look, I'm going to tell you this to you as plainly as I can and straight to the heart. Our fight is not against flesh and blood. It's against principalities and powers and the dark unseen forces of wickedness in heavenly places. Satan is a master of stealth, disguise, propaganda. The wiles of the devil means exactly that. He is an expert in perception, manipulation, lying, seduction, maneuvering. Okay? And so are his children. If you think for a minute that these media superstars who are acting all sanctimonious and moral in public, if you were to even have a glimpse of what was going on in their private, sexual, moral, and personal lives, I think most of you would be beyond shocked. I think most of you, to be quite honestly, have absolutely no idea the level of depravity that many of these people in the media are involved in. I'm serious about that. You think you have an understanding of what they're into and what's going on. You think you have an accurate conception. And I'm here to remind you that you're not even close to perceiving what they're really into. And what they're really into, without being specific, is some very, very, very dark stuff. And yet you're allowing them to spoon feed you pseudo-morality? These people don't give a hoot. Do you think that they even blush about this story, this manufactured story that Trump had a relationship with a prostitute? That isn't even on their radar screen, man. On their list of moral things, that's like non-existent. I don't want to go too deep, but I'm going to talk about this at the conference. You need to tune in. You need to get others to tune in. I'll close with this. And I explain it in detail in my book, Conquering the Matrix, which you need to get. Stanley Kubrick, in his movie, Eyes Wide Shut, it's a graphic movie. It has a semi-pornographic main scene. So that's a word of warning. It's not for children. That main scene that was semi-pornographic consisted of an occult orgy among the most powerful and elite people in Great Britain. And Stanley Kubrick, the filmmaker, shot it inside the mansion of Rothschild. Yet he was forced to, in the editing process, remove about 30 minutes of that occult orgy scene. Not because of the graphic titillation, but because it contained content and truths. Mysteriously, about 30 days after he started editing that footage, incredible pressure came upon him to remove that footage from the movie Eyes Wide Shut with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. In perfect health, mysteriously, Stanley Kubrick died. He was trying to communicate something in this final film about the reality and the nature of the occult globalist elite and who they are and what they're really into. I'll leave it at that. Look, this game, this matrix that we're in, is far more sinister than you realize. Please, don't be naive. Many of you think you know because you have a certain amount of worldly experience, because you're sophisticated. I don't doubt that you are, but you think you know what these people are up to. I'm trying to humbly tell you, as politely as I can, is that you don't even have a clue what they're up to. You don't have a clue. Visit paulmcguire.us. We have books and resources that can help you. You need to get a copy of Conquering the Matrix. You need to get a copy of Trumpocalypse. You need to get a copy of Mass Awakening. And most of all, you need to spread far and wide as fast as you can the free live streaming of the Red River Bible Prophecy Conference, or come. It's free. These guys, it's a bunch of independent Christian businessmen. They're not super wealthy. They put on the conference, and it costs them. They lose money on it, but they do it as a ministry. So support them. At least get people to watch it. I'm not judging other ministries that have to charge for conferences, because conferences are very, very expensive to put on. Visit paulmcguire.us and tune in. You'll catch me opening day of the conference. I don't know what time zone I'm speaking in, but it's 9 a.m., March 16th. I'm going to kick it off. And I have some information that I'm going to share with you that's biblical, that deals with current events, but it's explosive because it is information you've never heard before, but you need to hear it. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.